The stars gleamed like cold pinpricks against the infinite black, their light barely reaching the orbiting research station where Hana Kim spent most of her days. At 21, she was the youngest xenolinguist in the colony's history, but her passion for decoding alien signals had earned her a place on the mission's primary team. The Arcanus 9 colony had always been a relatively quiet corner of space, its inhabitants more concerned with crop yields and weather control than first contact scenarios. That's why the signal was so unexpected. "Professor, I'm seeing something strange in the beacon logs," Hana said, leaning closer to her terminal. Her heart thudded with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The transmission was faint, heavily distorted, but its pattern didn't match any known human beacon or previously catalogued alien relay. Dr. Malik, her gruff and cautious mentor, frowned and adjusted his glasses. "Put it on the main screen." Hana transferred the feed and the room filled with a flickering cascade of symbols, spiky glyphs that ebbed and flowed like a pulsating heartbeat. "Definitely not human," Hana whispered. "It almost looks desperate. Desperate." "What makes you think that?" Malik asked. "It's the timing. These signals don't follow a standard interval, they're increasing in frequency, as if someone's trying to get attention fast." Malik rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The room's silent save for the hum of the station's life support systems. "It could be interference from a damaged relay, or a trap. It could also be someone in real trouble," Hana replied, her voice firm. After a brief discussion with the station's command crew, it was decided they'd send out a small team to investigate the source. Hana, eager to be part of a potential first contact moment, volunteered immediately. Malik agreed, albeit reluctantly. A shuttle was prepped within hours, and by the time they neared the source of the transmission, the faint signal had gone quiet. Hana sat at the shuttle's console, her hands darting over the interface as she fine-tuned the sensors. When the object came into view, everyone on board fell silent. A vessel hung in the void like a broken bird. Its hull was sleek and black, dotted with faintly glowing patterns that looked more like veins than lights. Large gashes marred its surface, and chunks of debris floated nearby. "Is that an alien ship?" whispered one of the engineers. "Can't be certain," Malik said, though his voice betrayed a sense of awe. "But it's not one of ours." Hana stared at the vessel's cracked exterior. Her mind raced with questions. Who built it? What happened to them? Were they still aboard, perhaps injured or worse? As the shuttle cautiously approached, Hana's instruments began picking up faint power signatures. "There's still energy in their core," she said, her tone laced with curiosity. "Whatever happened, it hasn't completely shut down." When they finally docked, the interior of the alien craft was cold and eerily quiet. Hana and the others donned their suits and moved cautiously down the dim corridors. The walls were smooth and organic, like the inside of some metallic beast. Strange symbols, similar to the ones from the transmission, flickered faintly along the surfaces. "I don't like this," one of the engineers muttered, gripping his plasma cutter tightly. "Keep moving," Malik ordered. "Stay together and don't touch anything." Hana's gaze darted across the walls. She felt both fear and exhilaration. This was what she had always dreamed of. An actual alien ship, with technology and language she might decipher. The transmission had to mean something. Perhaps it was a call for help. Maybe they could find survivors. Then they found the first chamber. It was a spherical room, and at its center stood a crystalline structure, glowing a faint blue. Around it were several smooth slabs that resembled tables. They were empty, but the walls displayed holograms that showed unmistakable images of human figures, diagrams of internal organs, and strands of DNA. "Are those?" Hana began, but she couldn't finish the question. "Human schematics," Malik said grimly. "How did they get these?" The group exchanged uneasy glances. Suddenly, the door behind them sealed shut. Red lights began to pulse along the walls, and a low hum vibrated through the floor. "Professor, what's going on?" Hana asked, her voice rising. Before anyone could answer, figures emerged from hidden panels in the walls. tall, slender beings clad in dark, segmented armor. Their faces were obscured by smooth masks, and their limbs moved with unnerving precision. "Back to the shuttle," Malik shouted. "Now!" The team tried to retreat, but the aliens moved too quickly. One by one, they were subdued by weapons that emitted pulses of blue light. Hana managed to fire off a warning signal before the energy burst hit her. As darkness consumed her vision, the last thing she saw was one of the alien figures looming over her, a cold, analytical gaze visible behind the translucent mask. The humans had come seeking answers, but what they found was a nightmare beyond their comprehension. The cell was an amalgamation of sterile walls and faint, pulsating lights. Hana drifted in and out of consciousness, the dull ache in her limbs competing with the sharp sting of her wounds. The Striak had taken her, separating her from her team. She had no idea if they were still alive, if they were enduring the same treatment or worse. When she came to, the first thing she noticed was the smell, metallic and clinical. The air seemed recycled, devoid of life's usual hints of sweat, oil, or even the faint tang of ozone from human tech. Instead, it carried a cold sterility that made her feel more like an object than a person. The second thing she noticed was the sound, a soft hum that pulsed irregularly, as though the walls themselves were alive. A door hissed open and one of them entered. The Striak were tall, spindly creatures, their bodies clad in seamless dark exosuits. The suits glimmered faintly, like obsidian under moonlight. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, transparent masks that gave glimpses of pale, angular features and inscrutable, many-eyed gazes. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, but there was a deliberate, calculating rhythm to everything they did, an efficiency that terrified Hana more than brute force ever could. This particular Striak, Hana came to think of it as the Overseer, carried a small device that resembled a metallic egg. When it activated, tiny projections sprung forth, casting soft blue beams that ran across her body like a scanner. She tried to shift away, but the restraints held firm. Her arms and legs were splayed on a smooth, curved surface that tilted her upright, making her feel like a butterfly pinned in a collector's case. The Overseer said nothing. Its kind never spoke, at least not in a way she could understand. Instead, the device in its hands emitted a series of rhythmic chirps and whistles, sounds that reminded her of sonar pings and digital code. Each time the sound changed, Hana felt a different sensation. Heat coursing through her veins, a sharp jolt in her spine, a cold numbness in her fingers. It was as if they were testing her reactions, cataloging her pain thresholds, probing for her body's breaking points. Hana fought to keep silent at first, clenching her teeth and swallowing her cries, but the Striak were patient. Their methods were slow and precise. Hours bled into what felt like days, and eventually, her will began to crumble. She screamed, she begged, she wept, and through it all, the Overseer never showed a flicker of emotion. Unbeknownst to Hana, her torment was being recorded, each agonized plea, each ragged breath, each trembling sob. The recordings were then compressed into a dense stream of data and transmitted outward, a cold declaration of the Striak's power and disdain for humanity. The alien transmissions reached human outposts and colonies as distorted bursts of sound and light, their meaning initially unclear. But as engineers and linguists worked tirelessly to decode them, they uncovered the horrifying truth. These weren't just alien broadcasts, they were showcases of human suffering. On Arcanus 9, the Itais colony's command center received fragments of the signal. At first, the transmissions seemed like garbled noise. Then the tech teams began to isolate patterns. They identified the tortured cries as human voices. Within hours, they had pieced together enough of the stream to recognize Hana's face, her voice, her anguish. The realization swept through the colony like a firestorm. The brightest, most promising linguist they had ever trained, now a captive, enduring unspeakable acts. Back on the alien vessel, Hana had long since lost track of time. The Overseer's sessions were interspersed with periods of total darkness and silence, only to resume without warning. She tried to speak to them, to plead, to reason, but the Striak ignored her words. They seemed more interested in what her body could endure, how her nervous system responded to their instruments, and what secrets her biology might reveal. In the quiet moments between torment, Hana's mind wandered. She thought of home, of her parents who had supported her dream of becoming a xenolinguist. She thought of her colleagues and friends, wondering if they had escaped, if they were alive, if anyone even knew what had happened. These thoughts gave her fleeting hope, but the hopelessness of her situation crushed her again and again. Meanwhile, on Arcanus 9, as more transmissions came through, the colony's leaders were thrust into a moral quandary. How could they respond to this clear act of aggression? Some pushed for diplomacy, believing that humanity couldn't afford to provoke a species capable of such precise cruelty. Others argued for immediate retaliation, convinced that any show of weakness would invite further attacks. The debate was heated, but one thing became clear. This was no simple misunderstanding. The Striak had made their intentions clear. They saw humans as specimens, not as equals. The transmissions grew darker. The images showed Hana's body deteriorating under the strain, her once bright eyes dull and lifeless, her voice hoarse from screaming. The colony's populace, already angry and fearful, began to demand action. Protests erupted, demanding that humanity strike back. But before the colony could mount any response, the final transmission arrived. In it, Hana's body lay still, her restraints released. The Striak had pushed her too far, and she was gone. When the message ended, a single line of alien glyphs appeared on the screen. The linguists translated it as one word: irrelevant. News of Hana's death swept through the human colonies like a tidal wave, leaving outrage and sorrow in its wake. On Arcanus 9, what had once been a heated debate about how to deal with the Striak became a cry for vengeance. The images of Hana's final moments, her broken body and hollow eyes, played on every screen. Across the colonies, people gathered in streets, makeshift squares, and military bases. They held candles, sang songs in her memory, and clutched their children tightly, all while demanding action from the Unified Human Command, UHC. The time for waiting was over. Humanity would strike back. In a hidden orbital base near Jupiter, Vice Admiral Elias Heron convened with the highest-ranking officers of the UHC. The room was tense. Heron, a decorated veteran known for his calm demeanor, now had a deep furrow in his brow. "The Striak think of us as nothing," he said, addressing the gathered officers. "They've dissected one of our own. They've sent us her screams, her death, as if we were animals to be frightened off with fire. This cannot stand, but we must not let our rage blind us," cautioned Fleet Marshal Rania Duval, her voice measured. "We have to strike smart, not just hard. If we rush into battle without understanding their capabilities, we'll show them that we're not prey." Another officer interrupted. "They want to test our endurance? Let's show them we won't stop until they beg for peace." The decision was made. Humanity would not stand down. The UHC authorized Operation Emberfall, a full-scale offensive designed to hit the Striak where it hurt the most, one of their primary forward installations on the edge of known space. Fleet carriers, heavy assault cruisers, and fast attack frigates were readied within weeks. Engineers worked around the clock to retrofit existing ships with updated shielding and experimental weaponry. Elite Marine units trained for zero-gravity boarding operations, while intelligence teams pored over every scrap of data gleaned from the alien transmissions. It was all still a patchwork of assumptions, but the humans had one thing going for them: their sheer determination. As the fleet gathered in a high-orbit staging area near Saturn, the reality of the mission set in. Hana's name was on everyone's lips. She had become more than a person. She was a symbol. Some whispered prayers in her name before battle preparations, while others wore her initials etched into their helmets. Anger burned bright, but so did the weight of loss. This wasn't just revenge. It was a fight to prove that humanity deserved to exist on equal footing with the powerful Striak. The first wave of the offensive was swift and brutal. Human ships surged out of warp and immediately engaged the Striak perimeter defenses. The battle was unlike any humanity had ever faced. Striak vessels didn't just fire traditional weapons, they emitted focused energy pulses that disoriented pilots and knocked out communication grids. Their ships moved with a fluidity that defied standard physics, twisting and folding space around them in ways human engineers couldn't yet comprehend. But the humans fought back with raw tenacity. They used swarm tactics, overwhelming Striak ships with numbers and relentless barrages. While the Striak possessed superior technology, humanity's knack for unconventional strategy and adaptability began to pay off. Still, the cost was high. Every victory came with heavy losses. Ships were shattered, crews were lost, and soldiers gave their lives to breach the Striak's defenses. On the surface of the Striak installation, a massive biomechanical fortress embedded into the crust of a moon, the ground forces faced their own nightmares. The Striak's infantry was eerily precise, using weapons that disabled nervous systems rather than causing outright physical damage. Human Marines, trained for physical endurance, had to find new ways to overcome these debilitating attacks. They fought street by street, corridor by corridor as the installation's layout constantly shifted, walls moving, floors tilting, and ceilings collapsing to crush advancing squads. Hana's image became a rallying cry among the human forces. When morale faltered, officers reminded their troops of her suffering and the meaning of their fight. The battle became more than just a military campaign, it was a statement of humanity's resilience. For Hana, for all the lives lost and for those yet to come, they would push on. As the weeks dragged into months, the war escalated. The Striak, previously content to stay on the defensive, began launching their own counterstrikes. Human colonies on the outskirts of the frontier were attacked without warning. Some settlements managed to evacuate before the alien ships arrived, but others weren't so lucky. The brutal retaliation only deepened humanity's resolve, cementing the war as a bitter, drawn-out struggle of survival and dominance. Back on Earth, the conflict dominated every news feed. Civilians rallied around the war effort, sending supplies, building weapons, and volunteering for service. Propaganda posters bore Hana's face alongside slogans like, "Never again," and "For our future." While some voices still called for diplomacy or a ceasefire, they were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of anger and grief. As Operation Emberfall continued, human forces began to turn the tide. Through hard-won intelligence and relentless trial and error, they discovered vulnerabilities in the Striak's advanced tech. They adapted, creating new tactics to counter the disorienting energy pulses and learning to predict the alien ship's seemingly erratic movements. What had once seemed impossible now seemed merely improbable. The Striak installation, the fortress where Hana's torment had begun, was finally breached. Human forces stormed its core, finding the chambers where she and others had been tortured. They recovered fragments of data, chilling evidence of how the Striak viewed humanity and the grisly details of their experiments. It was both a vindication of their fight and a sobering reminder of the horrors they faced. By the end of the chapter, the battle was far from over, but humanity had shown the Striak one undeniable truth: they were no longer easy prey. The war, now bloodily underway, had transformed humanity's place in the cosmos, and there was no turning back. The war against the Striak dragged on far longer than anyone had anticipated. What had begun as a swift, brutal response to Hana's death had become a protracted struggle, a conflict where victory seemed increasingly difficult to define. The initial rush of vengeance that had driven humanity's first offensives gradually gave way to exhaustion. Shipyards worked overtime to replace losses. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers. Families back home who had once cheered each new attack now dreaded the casualty lists that came with every battle report. Among the officers at Unified Human Command, the mood was somber. Vice Admiral Heron, who had once spoken so fervently about retribution, now found himself questioning the cost. Each battle won seemed to breed another, and the Striak's counterattacks grew more desperate, more deadly. Intelligence reports indicated that the Striak's once monolithic force was starting to fracture. Some factions apparently disagreed with the prolonged war, but their infighting only made them more unpredictable and dangerous. Fleet Marshal Duval, always a voice of caution, urged the UHC to consider a new approach. "We've hit them hard," she argued during a closed session. "We've shown them that humanity won't be slaughtered without consequence. But if we continue at this pace, the only outcome will be mutual destruction." "Are you suggesting we let them off?" another admiral asked, incredulous. "After what they did to Hana, to everyone they've taken?" "I'm saying that if we don't try something different, we'll lose more than we've already lost," Duval said. "We need to understand what drives them, why they did what they did. If we can find leverage, some common ground, maybe we can negotiate an end before we bleed each other dry." The room fell silent. For months, revenge had been the unifying force behind humanity's military campaign. But now, with the toll mounting, even the staunchest hawks couldn't ignore the cost. Still, the idea of negotiating with the Striak, the creatures who had tortured Hana to death, who had sent her suffering as a message, felt like betrayal to many. But to others, it seemed like the only way to prevent annihilation. As the UHC debated, the war reached a turning point. During a massive engagement near the galactic rim, a human strike team managed to board a Striak command vessel and seize a trove of data. The information was invaluable. It revealed that the Striak were not a single unified species, but a collection of splintered factions, each with its own agenda. The faction that had taken Hana was one of the most extreme, and its leaders had used her as both an experiment and a warning. But not all Striak agreed with their methods. Some even sought to end the conflict, fearful that humanity's relentless retaliation would bring about their extinction. With this new information, a contingent within the UHC began reaching out through covert channels. They hoped to find Striak factions willing to talk, to broker some kind of truce. It wasn't easy. Every attempt was met with suspicion, and the Striak's cryptic communication methods made progress painfully slow. But eventually, a breakthrough occurred. A Striak envoy, a shadowy figure known only as Kelzin, agreed to meet with human representatives on neutral ground. The meeting was tense. The humans approached it with a mix of hope and caution, knowing that any sign of weakness could be exploited. The Striak envoy, too, seemed wary. Hana's memory loomed large over the negotiation table, unspoken yet omnipresent. The humans demanded acknowledgement of her suffering, and admission that the Striak's actions had been monstrous. The Striak in turn spoke of their own desperation, of a dying civilization clinging to survival, of a faction that believed humanity posed an existential threat to their existence. It was not an easy conversation, but it was a start. In the months that followed, tentative agreements began to form. Certain Striak factions agreed to withdraw from contested territories. In exchange, humanity eased its relentless bombardment, pulling back from all-out extermination. Slowly, painfully, a fragile ceasefire took shape. The factions responsible for Hana's death remained a point of contention, but even their power waned as more Striak realized the futility of endless war. On Earth, Hana's name came to symbolize not just a rallying cry for revenge, but a reminder of what humanity had endured and overcome. Monuments were built in her honor, not just as a victim, but as the spark that had forced humanity to prove its strength, its resilience, and ultimately, its willingness to seek a better path. Her image, once a source of rage, became a symbol of unity and reflection. It reminded humanity that in seeking vengeance, they had come perilously close to losing their own humanity. In the end, the war didn't end with a decisive battle or a grand treaty. It faded piece by piece as the two species found ways to coexist in the vast, uncaring galaxy. The scars remained, on soldiers, on worlds, and in the hearts of those who had lived through the bloodshed. But so did the lessons, that anger, while powerful, could not sustain a future, that understanding an enemy was often the only way to overcome them, and that even in the darkest times, humanity had the capacity to reach for something greater than revenge.